Let's talk transfers, because that's why Alex is here, and talk about Martin's former club Arsenal. Lots going on with them, do you expect?
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic result for them in the circumstances last night after another brainless red card, in my opinion, from Granit Xhaka. And it does leave them short of midfielders, particularly ahead of this North London derby on Sunday. Martin Odegaard already injured. Thomas Partey, of course, away on African Cup of Nations duty. Does make the decision to allow Ainsley Maitland-Niles to join Roma. That much more peculiar, I feel. But one name very much in the frame when it comes to Arsenal is that of the Juventus midfielder Arthur. We spoke about him yesterday. It's my understanding that face-to-face talks between the player and the Juventus board due for today as he tries to push through a move to the Premier League. This is a player once compared by Lionel Messi to the Barcelona legend Xavi. Clearly has lost his way a bit in Turin. I think there's still a bit of a reluctance from Juventus to let him go without a replacement. Among a list of possible replacements, by the way, one Ruben Loftus-Cheek of Chelsea. But this is a deal that Arsenal are really hoping they can get done, just to give them extra options in midfield, Martin. But it won't be done now in time for Sunday. We know that.
No, and clearly Arsenal need to move in that area without doubt. I think they're trying to take, is it Eze, the young player back from Portsmouth that's been on loan out earlier in the season.
Miguel Aziz.
Yeah, sorry. A young player that I know behind the scenes they think he's an outstanding talent. But yeah, Arsenal need somebody in there. I mean, he's only 25, Arthur, by the way, and he was obviously injured earlier in the season. He hasn't featured much this year. But nonetheless, they need to get really good talent into that area. It's an area Arsenal crying out for some experience.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of outgoings, by the way, Mikel Arteta still trying to trim the squad. Said Kolasinac is a player who is out of contract in the summer, and it's my understanding that Arsenal would be willing to allow him to terminate that contract early to complete a move away from the Emirates. Marseille over in France, very keen to sign him. And Pablo Mari, a player who really has been frustrated at a lack of game time, mainly due to the form of Gabriel and Ben White at the heart of defence this season. He's set to join Udinese on loan, so all change at Martin's former club.
Okay, lots of changes at Arsenal. What about Burnley? Because they've lost Chris Wood, and a lot of eyes being raised about that transfer in terms of how it obviously means that Burnley are lacking a striker when they're in a relegation fight, and obviously him moving to Newcastle, one of their relegation rivals as well. Could they be finding someone in this window to replace him, do you think?
Well, it's maybe a blast from the past in many ways. Andy Carroll on Burnley's radar, former Premier League player, former Newcastle player. Ironically, would be ironic if he was to play a part in keeping Burnley up and relegating Newcastle. He's 33 years of age now. He's been at Reading on a short-term contract in the Championship. Has played a few games for them, only scored one goal, I think, so far. His contract expires after their game this weekend. I know Reading are keen for him to stay, but Burnley, one of a number of clubs tracking that situation, and Reading with all kinds of financial problems, might be difficult for them to convince him to stay committed to them.
You were quite shocked when that name was mentioned.
I don't know what to say to Burnley fans if that's the solution to losing a player of a decent stature of Chris Wood, and arguably and debatably on a release clause that didn't kick in until the summer. So you didn't even have to let him go.
Chris Wood, yeah.
Yeah, there's an argument and debate of this. But I mean, people have been telling me in and around football that release clause, it'd be interesting to hear from Burnley, didn't even kick in until the summer.
Well, you'd have thought so. I mean,
so Burnley didn't have to release him. They've let him go to bank 20 million quid on the basis of a football club ownership that was bought with Burnley's own money. And if they get relegated, we'll be bang in trouble. And they replace him with a free transfer of Andy Carroll. I'm not sure what that tells Burnley.
I mean, that is, when you say that this isn't down to a clause in his contract being triggered, then that's quite alarming, I'd have thought, for Burnley fans to hear that.
And the reason why is most football clubs pay things on the drip. I tell you who doesn't. Manchester City, Chelsea, and now Newcastle. So when someone buys a player for you for 20 million quid, they might ask you to spread it over 3 years. When someone says to you, I'm going to give you 20 million quid and I'm going to give it to you now, 20 million quid becomes worth 25 and 30 million quid because it's here and now money. And if you're finding yourself in a difficult position, you stockpile cash now.
Selling to a rival, when you're saying there it's this quick, fast cash perhaps that Burnley are getting, but the 20, 30, whatever million you think it's worth, how can that outweigh the possibility of relegation and the hundreds of millions that comes with?
It depends whether you look at the landscape and think there's a distinct possibility. If you're an American financier that bought a football club with everyone else's money besides your own, loaded it with debt, and uses the club's money to pay off the debt, that's one thing that your Glazers did at United, but United is United, and United does £500 million other blimp and a year turnover. Burnley are far different. If they get relegated, I said about 6-8 months ago, this will be a dreadful situation for them. And I think this is a land grab for protecting their position in the event they get relegated.